We've learned a couple things going into this episode 200 and something.
Oh.
Maggie likes women, and we both like Dungeons and Dragons now. So
This works great because I feel like I have a lot to say about how gender roles are handled in this movie. I actually think that's a really nice... I think there's a thread here that we can follow. Yeah.
Basically, Maggie and I are going into this movie as people who like fantasy. As I'm sure people listening at home are. People who like Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones, Harry Potter, that kind of stuff. So we're going into that as sort of basic level fans. And I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know if it was just going to be deep cuts for the diehards or if it was going to be so mainstream and almost like sanitized and unrecognizable that it would just be generic. Because it could happen. I mean, it's like a Hasbro property. They could sand all the edges off and make it, overwhelmingly compelling to a mainstream audience.
Yes.
In a way where it has no character or individuality.
Right.
And the
way that all other fantasy adaptations have been.
Right. Lately. Or it could be like a sword and sorcery MCU movie. And I don't think this was any of those things.
Yeah.
It took me like 20 minutes to settle in to what this movie was, and then I loved it. It's like 2 hours and 15 minutes long, and this was just a wonderful, fun ride.
It was so much fun. I went into it like not sure if I was going to like it. Like the trailers had looked kind of fun and whatever, but I was like, I'm so I know we should talk Marvel a lot here, but I think it's really relevant because Marvel is such a like cultural touchstone for movies, and it's a helpful like just reference point because I've been so burned by the ironic humor of Marvel that I can't stand.
It's not even the characters. Like, it's not a blanket critique of the MCU as a whole.
No.
It's specific things and tendencies.
Yeah.
Talking about that sort of, the remnants of Joss Whedon humor that has kind of poisoned the MCU. You're not talking about the characters, the loyalty to the comics. It's none of that conversation.
That's not what I mean, right.
It's that same boring, unfunny, detached irony that's poisoned all mainstream movies.
Yes, right.
The MCU are just the ultimate mainstream movies.
Right. And having seen the trailers for this, I could tell there was that, like, there was the whiff of that flavor of humor.
Yeah.
And I was very worried it was going to be a lot of that. But the humor, I think, worked really well. I'm trying to figure out why. I think it was because it was funny the whole way through. Like, I was thinking about it, again, comparing it to, like, a Marvel movie, for example. Like, in an MCU movie, there's real interest in raising the dramatic stakes and having really like intense emotional moments, but then they are immediately undercut by these quick moments of humor, but the humor is not all that funny, and all it did was just like desaturate the intensity of the emotional moment.
It mocks the premise.
Right.
Which means you can't take anything seriously for more than a minute.
So you're left not taking anything seriously, and you're also not laughing.
Yeah, I think the MCU critique is interesting because, yes, it is a cultural grindstone because it has been such a juggernaut for 15 years.
Yeah.
But the thing, when the MCU works, it's pretty wonderful. Like, it becomes this spectacular, meaning spectacle.
Yes.
It becomes this spectacular, dazzling thing. And the thing that anchors that humor and makes that style of movie work is Robert Downey Jr. And if you boil that down further, and this is my way of sort of talking about my favorite part of Dungeons & Dragons here, the most important ingredient in an action comedy, because that is what this is. It's a genre movie, but it's an action comedy.
Right.
The most important ingredient in an action comedy is charisma.
Yes.
Robert Downey Jr. is the most charismatic man on the earth. Most charismatic human being of generations.
Yes. Like incredibly charismatic.
There's a reason he makes this many billion-dollar movies. It's not just the likable. It's the humor. It's the wit. It's the speed.
And it's not just Iron Man. Like, it's also Sherlock Holmes.
It's everything.
It's also him and Zodiac.
Tropic Thunder.
Yeah, right.
Zodiac, yeah. I mean, anything. Kiss, Kiss, Bang, Bang. He's great in all of these things. It's charisma. And Chris Pine has Hall of Fame level charisma.
He's so good. He's so good.
I was encouraged because I've seen him in the Star Trek trilogy.
Yeah.
The first one I thought was great. The second one, I like Benedict Cumberbatch. That one was good. Third one didn't do much for me. But I watched all of them, and I would have watched 3 more because I really like him. And I think he's a great, charismatic performer.
Yeah.
And he's just charming and watchable.
Yes.
And I was encouraged when I saw Chris Pine's name as a producer, his production credit on Dungeons & Dragons, because it feels like this could be a better chance at bat for him. Because the Star Trek franchise, even though they made money, it felt like they kind of faded away. Why were there only 3?
Yeah.
Why did they it felt like it was kind of weaker and thinner each time. Why wasn't that a whole universe like Marvel? And I liked his production credit because it feels like this is his chance to take control of this thing and make sure it becomes that. We'll talk about the franchise possibility later, but if charisma is the common theme in what makes this kind of movie work, you can't not mention Hugh Grant.
Oh man, Hugh Grant
as
was
the main
so
villain.
good.
So you have an incredibly charismatic hero and villain.
Yes.
So that's your basic structure of the movie.
Yes.
You know it's at least going to be watchable.
Yeah. And the other actors had great charisma too. I mean, Chris Pine and Hugh Grant are the stars, in every way. But Gina Rodriguez, I thought was really fun. I enjoy
Michelle
her.
Rodriguez.
Sorry. I was thinking of Gina Carano. No, Michelle.
That would be a different movie.
Sorry. Michelle Rodriguez, she... I don't think she's that great an actress. But when there are moments where she's really, really good. Do you know what I mean?
I think they made her more of the bruiser character, which was a fun way to kind of reverse the trope.
Yeah.
But I think part of that character, it reminded me, we'll talk about Guardians of the Galaxy in a minute, but the Dave Bautista's Drax, is that his name in that movie? The gray guy?
Yeah.
His delivery is that kind of constipated, stilted delivery of being that big hulking bruiser.
Yeah.
So if Michelle Rodriguez is playing that archetype here, I thought she was doing that same delivery, which is kind of emotionally frustrated, but very charming.
That's true. It's hard to tell. It's is she not a great actress, or is that just what her character is? Her character won't quite get there emotionally.
I haven't seen her in enough to tell.
I've literally only seen her in Fast and Furious, so maybe that's not fair.
I quite liked her character here.
Sure, yeah, no, she was great, and the two younger the kids were also really good. And I really like what's her name? Sophia Lillis.
Yeah, of course.
She plays the druid in this. She's Beverly from It. And I loved her in It. I thought she was fantastic in there, and she was really great here. And the kid who played the wizard, Justice Smith, he was really good too. You know who else has great charisma? Is Regé-Jean Page.
Yeah, from Bridgerton.
Which we infamously hated. But he was great in Bridgerton, and he was excellent in this.
His screen presence, because his character is again that more stilted thing where he's sort of the noble with the perfect posture, who's not outwardly funny, but he's very funny. It's just he's not funny by making jokes.
In a Spock way, almost.
Yes, it was almost physical comedy, the way he was delivering things. But his screen presence is incredible. We walked out of the movie, and I've seen him in Bridgerton. He was good in that, but it's a very different kind of role.
Yeah.
He's a movie star.
Yeah.
And there are plenty of people in movies who aren't movie stars. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
He is a movie star. And he shined in this movie.
Yeah, he was good. And just the sorry, go ahead. No. Well, because the way that all the characters interacted, they all had good on-screen chemistry, and I think that was also really essential in the success of this movie, because it's a entourage cast, it's a band of people coming together trying to do something. So
and they fulfilled those sort of fantasy classes.
Yes,
to flesh out this sort of pseudo fellowship.
They did. You've got your wizard, you've got your druid, you've got your rogue. I guess is what is Chris Pine supposed to be?
Han Solo.
Yeah. And so that you have all the different different classes. Yeah, and so that made it really fun. But also they weren't quite what you expected. You don't necessarily expect the druid to be a young girl. You don't expect a barbarian character to be a woman, and you don't, and so that was fun.
It was a fun riff. And that group chemistry in an action comedy. I've been doing these columns on our Substack lately, and one of them that I did most recently was on Operation Fortune, which is a great action comedy. I was saying, it's like half eulogy if you read that column of me saying we don't get any great action comedies anymore, and now we have another one. This is a genre bent one. It's all fantasy all the time. But the relentless pacing, the jokes, the cohesion, the action set pieces, it is definitely of that genre.
I think. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
And the thing that maybe ties it more directly to that movie is that you have another delightful pig in the mud, mustache twirling Hugh Grant villain.
I was gonna say it's Hugh Grant in both of those movies. He just plays the same character.
It's exactly the same character,
just with different outfits.
It's as delightful and watchable in this as it was in Operation Fortune.
I didn't mind it at all. Like that's not at all a dig on Hugh Grant. Like he was incredible.
But if we're trying to describe or maybe sell this movie to you, because it's not doing as well as it should be, and we like covering things when they're current, not to jump on the bandwagon, but to push things,
to get you to go see it,
push things that we care about.
Yeah,
because if I watch a movie or read a book or watch a show that I care about, I am an evangelist for that thing. It is my only purpose in life. So I want this to do well.
Yeah, me too.
And maybe to kind of complicate the MCU comparison we were making earlier, this is the fantasy version of Guardians of the Galaxy, in that it is a group of, there are side characters, but it's basically 4 inept misfits sprinting through kaleidoscopic, colorful genre epics.
Yeah, starring Chris P.
And ultimately, I think the movies are incredibly compassionate. They're warm stories about found families, but you get all sorts of monsters and tech and fun stuff along the way. And connecting those two movies, this movie, like you have the Hugh Grant with the Operation Fortune connection, here you have a delightful like Bradley Cooper cameo.
Yes, it's true. Yeah.
And I know he's one of the main characters in Guardians, but he's a raccoon with an accent, and you can't really tell it's him.
You kind of forget that it's him. Yeah.
So he has a more visual, you see his head in his cameo.
Yeah, you see his
in this movie. But I think that's an interesting kind of passing the baton moment.
Yeah.
Of connecting this and Guardians, because it has that DNA, that scrappiness of mostly the first Guardians movie I'm talking about.
Yeah, and I did enjoy the first Guardians. I mean, it wasn't like my favorite thing ever, because like I'm not a sci-fi person and I'm not a Marvel person, but I thought, I was like, okay, for a Marvel movie, that was pretty good. I liked it.
And it had the charisma.
Yeah.
I mean, you like Chris Pratt from Parks and Recreation.
Yeah, he's so good in that.
And he's got great charisma in that role of Star-Lord.
Yeah, he does.
But I think you're right, for our sensibilities.
Yeah, this is better.
Dungeons & Dragons Honor Among Thieves has a style of pacing, a style of humor that I like more. One of the things I said to you when we were walking back to the car after we saw this is that it felt like it was edited like a really well-produced YouTube video.
Yeah.
Or almost a TikTok at times.
It had tight editing.
Yes, it was almost ruthless.
But it wasn't like jarring.
No.
Because some movies, especially like kids' movies, you can tell they're trying to appeal to that attention span, and it's so unsettling. This didn't have that at all.
I'm not making this comparison, but I kind of am. The thing I love about Arrested Development and Veep is the impatience of the writing.
Yeah.
Where every second, every line almost, is on to another joke with 3 other jokes buried inside
and like
there.
You miss it because you're laughing, but like there's a joke that's going while you're laughing. It's that dense.
Right. The thing that doesn't work for me in some of the Marvel property, I mean, some mainstream movies in general, is when you have that unfunny, detached irony without charisma to sell it, without jokes to sell it.
Yeah.
It just becomes boring. It becomes stale and overly long, like someone just won't shut up and let the scene end.
Yeah.
They keep just saying things in the hope that something's going to hit. Like the desperation starts to fill the room like noxious gas.
Yes, it has please clap energy.
Yes, it's Jeb.
Yeah.
Yes, it's Jeb Bush. The Jeb Bush MCU movies I do not like. But this one has great jokes.
It does.
Has good writing, and it has that YouTube editing, and with the tightness and ruthlessness of that editing, when you have a script that can stand up to that, of really marathoning through jokes and scenes with real natural character banter instead of those awkward memes.
Yeah.
You get a movie with a great flow where you have a real balance of it feeling like huge genre action set pieces like you'd see in something like a good Star Wars movie, balanced with almost the sketch humor that you get from, I was going to say SNL, but a good sketch comedy show.
Yeah.
Because it's always balancing what's the next big fantasy thing we're doing with playing with the fun of the group chemistry.
And I think what also worked about the humor in this movie is that the plot is relatively simple.
Right.
Like it's a guy trying to get his daughter back, and they got to like go through these things and get this thing to get the thing. Like it's and like they got to collect people along the way. Like it's really not complex.
Sure.
What happens and I guess it's like maybe it's weakening my argument maybe for this to just be here's why it's not Marvel, but like I don't know, this is my point of comparison. Like in a Marvel movie, the plots, I mean, as they make more and more and as they get deeper and deeper into this extravagant universe they've crafted, you have to make really complex plots with like lots of like backstories and like references and callbacks and Easter eggs and, oh, well, this big bad is actually only part of this bigger bad. And like, it just gets more and more complex. This was just straightforward. And so you weren't trying to like keep up with the plot. You knew where you were going. You knew what the goal was. So you could just enjoy the ride of the chemistry and the relationships and the jokes and the action. And it knew what it was. It wasn't trying to be something bigger than it was.
And this had such a budget on it. This was, I think, close to 150 million.
Yeah, it looked great.
Yeah, but it reminded me, one of the other columns I did on Substack, I didn't mean for this episode to be an ad,
this is
but
just
I
a
guess
plug.
it is. But I wrote about 65, the Adam Driver dinosaur movie.
Yes.
Which we really enjoyed as well. And the thing that really struck me, for it being a dinosaur movie, we all know what dinosaurs look like. There are basically 3 of them that anyone recognizes.
Yep.
And those, legally, have to be in every dinosaur movie. But in between the T-Rexes and the ones that fly and the ones with the spiky shit on their back, there's something else. You got to see something else chasing Adam Driver through the wilderness.
Yeah.
And 65 had really creative, imaginative dragons and dinosaurs, monsters and creatures.
Yeah.
Because they weren't all just dinosaurs.
Yeah.
And what I wanted to highlight in this discussion about Dungeons and Dragons is how wonderful and imaginative it looked. The monsters were incredible here. The effects, the environments, the colors. It was wondrous. You got the whole color palette here. Apparently there were some practical effects and animatronics.
Cool.
The costumes were a lot of fun. The sets were great.
It didn't feel like a CGI vomit session.
Right.
You know, like I could tell there was CGI in this movie, but it didn't just feel like, okay, it's a bunch of people in front of a blue screen for an hour and a half. Like it felt like a real set and real things were happening.
It felt inspired and new in a way that maybe something like the MCU can't anymore. Just because it's so culturally familiar. When you pump out, 30, 40 movies, people kind of get used to it.
Yeah.
But this felt hungry. And it has 2 directors and 2 writers, and it seemed like they all worked really well together.
Cool.
And these people seemed passionate about the genre, about the cast, about the script, about every single part of this. This was a hungry, passionate movie. And that is the X factor. Because as much as I'm talking about the charisma you want on screen with your lead, it's the charisma behind the scenes that sells it too.
Yeah.
When you have something that works so well, like the Pirates of the Caribbean movies, Johnny Depp in 2001, when we meet that character, is a revelation.
Yeah.
No one's seen anything like it, and he's just magnetic on screen. But it's the passion behind that, too.
Sure.
Of having people like Gore Verbinski, of having Jerry Bruckheimer kind of shepherd this thing.
Right.
You want that level of passion and charisma, and I felt that.
Yeah.
It's kind of an esoteric kind of X Factor sort of thing, but I felt that in this movie. Even if it isn't maybe what I would call like peak fantasy. This wasn't Game of Thrones this wasn't high fantasy kind of epic stuff.
Yeah.
It was really fun. And it was sort of a mainstream action comedy.
Yeah.
But it had a real magic to it. That I loved. And I loved being in this world for 2.5 hours.
Me too. Yeah. It was really fun. To another comparison for 65, Chloe Coleman plays the daughter in both of those movies.
Yes, she does.
Which I thought was very fun. I think another thing that worked for me, and a reason, this is connected to why I was kind of hesitant before we saw this movie.
Me too.
I had heard about the way that they were handling the writing of male characters versus female characters. And this is something that we talk about a lot because I think so many people get this wrong, is like how to be, how to be not a misogynist and how to be anti-sexist and how to write with equitability and to treat all characters like people. I think the problem that a lot of people face when crafting characters is, in an effort to make a woman strong, they just make her like a man. And in an effort to make a woman equal to or better than a man, they make a man weaker. But like it just ends up being cringy and not how people are, and it just gives off a weird message. I was worried that that's what this movie was going to do. And it almost did that. I think the way they handled the men was actually better than the way they handled the women.
They said some dumb things in interviews.
They
that
really
kind
did.
Of led us to think this was going to be different than what it was.
Yeah. I think the way they handled the women, I mean, like obviously like Michelle Rodriguez's character, they just kind of wrote her as a man. But with this element of her being this mother figure to the daughter.
Sure.
And she has this tenderness and this this kindness, and also the way that she really cared about Bradley Cooper's character. Like, they gave her an element of humanity and tenderness and gentleness and femininity that I think helped, and just made her a more well-rounded character. The way that they wrote the druid character, Doric, is that her name? Whatever. The way they wrote her, they just made her like really cool and like, but like she kind of had an attitude the way that a teenager does, and that was fun. But I really liked the way they wrote the men. They made Chris Pine's character very goofy, very smart, but also like kind of stupid at the same time, and he makes a lot of mistakes. And you see like both him and the wizard character, you see them both go through full character arcs. Like, I think the flaw is that they made the female characters kind of like they were at their peak the whole way through, which I think a lot of writers make that mistake because they're like, oh, we have to make the woman awesome, and so they like make her awesome the whole time, and she doesn't grow. The men, both of these male characters grew. Chris Pine sort of figured out like how to be a good friend and a good person and a good father more than anything. He recognized how he had failed his daughter, and he apologized and tried to atone for the mistakes he had made. But I thought my favorite character arc was with the wizard. What was his? Simon. Because at first he's not a good wizard. He's like doing this really like crappy like wizard magic show and like can't do a spell to save his life. And he like really, he only goes on this journey because he's the only wizard that Chris Pine's character knows. But you see him figure out how to attune to that helmet that they find and like grow confidence in himself, both in his ability to be a wizard, but also in his relationship with Doric, and you see him grow in that way. And so he goes through this huge character arc, which I really appreciated, instead of either just making him weak the whole time or just making him strong the whole time. Like, he was a real person who went through a real arc, and I really liked that.
And we have talked about this before, but we're going to keep talking about it as long as it continues to happen. And you can't tell if it's people sort of kowtowing to the media illiteracy of people seeing a flawed woman and thinking, well, that must mean the writer thinks all women are flawed. Like, either it's someone worrying the audience is stupid, or someone demonizing creators who dare to give characters flaws.
Yeah, it's hard to tell where it comes from. But
whatever the root of it, it's annoying. It is. And I think it is anti-progress.
And it's disrespectful to your audience.
Yeah, it's bad. It's bad in 100 degrees, and I think it pulls the conversation backwards. And I thought they handled that really well here.
Yeah,
I thought
for the most part,
there were flaws and difficulties given to these characters. And without spoiling it, I think they give some of those to Michelle Rodriguez towards the end of the movie.
Yeah,
I think she gets more of that arc, more of that challenge, and more of that opportunity to work through emotional difficulties.
Yes, it does.
I thought parts of the press tour were sort of dumb for this movie.
They really were. I don't know if they were just trying to appeal to certain audience members or what, but it was weird.
But honestly, the trailer was not a great representation of what I saw.
Oh yeah, the movie's way better than the trailer made it look like.
What I loved about this movie, almost none of that was in the trailer. I don't think it captured the charm or the charisma of it. I think it made it look like it was just a parody of the genre,
almost like it was making fun of it, and this totally wasn't.
No, this was a passionate, loving fantasy story.
Yeah,
this was not a goof on fantasy as a genre.
And there were like dozens of, and I'm sure more than we recognized, references to Dungeons and Dragons. Like, it was like a real homage to it, like in a way that was accessible to people who aren't as familiar, but it seems like really rewards those who are. And it felt really respectful of, and like it was reveling in the genre and that universe.
Right, because there's a pretty low ceiling on how passionate a parody can be. Like, we've been rewatching and watching the Scream franchise. First one's great, and it is very meta. It's very about horror and the slasher subgenre, and it is making fun of and goofing on and recognizing trends and patterns and in tropes. The genre. But it's also lovingly recreating them and making a slasher movie.
Yes.
And if you look at where all of the sequels go wrong, The new one's actually good. I really liked the new one.
Scream 6.
Scream 6 is very good.
Mm-hmm.
Scream 2 through 5, I thought were dreadful. Mm-hmm. And I thought it was mostly because they hit that ceiling in like the first scene.
Yeah.
And then they were either so meta that they couldn't take themselves seriously enough to develop a plot.
Yeah.
Or the other way, where they were so busy trying to kind of retrofit a plot that they weren't making fun of and doing the meta commentary on all of the twisting logic into pretzels things that they were doing.
We were just swinging wildly back and forth between two kinds of movies in the same movie. It was weird.
Right. And I know that struggle takes down a lot of modern movies because along with that sort of MCU rise was that sort of ironic meta commentary humor.
Yes, self-awareness.
And they're both exhausting when done wrong. I mean, we talked about that before, kind of walking through this example of why that humor can be so frustrating when it's not done by Robert Downey Jr. But I think the meta commentary has the same thing. And the trailer made me think this was going to be one of those.
Yeah.
It's not.
No, it's not at all. Yeah.
It is... I mean, this feels dumb to say maybe, but the movie is invested in its universe.
Yeah.
It's invested in the story. The characters are playing this straight. They care about what happens. There is that found family story. It's sincere.
Like there's all this humor, but it's not humor that makes fun of itself.
No.
It's not making fun of the movie. It's not making fun of the universe. It's the way that groups of friends talk to each other and joke with each other, just really extreme.
Yeah.
You know?
So let's end on this note, kind of zooming out. I don't know if this movie's going to do well enough to get a sequel or a franchise, but let's play it out. Imagine we do get a franchise out of this. What do you want that to look like? I have some notes, but I wanted to ask you first.
Well, can I say I don't want it to be a franchise?
Of course.
I think this was great, and that should be it.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Like, I feel like it's only... I don't think it can do any better. I think this is the best. Okay. I'm not saying this is the best movie ever. I just mean I think this is the best iteration of what this is. And I think if they do another one, it's just going to be, I think they're going to have to start leaning into the self-awareness, or it's going to feel boring or one note, or, oh, what are they going to do this time? Like, I don't know. I think you'd have to like do whole new characters or something. Like, I just think a sequel to this is, and like the story is wrapped up. Like, what else could they do with that story?
Well, Regé-Jean Page, you could do more with him.
Sure, yeah.
Because he was, I mean, he wasn't a cameo, but he was in the movie for like half an hour.
Yeah, he wasn't in there for long. But the problem is, like, again,
but he's kind of a one-note character.
Well, right, and the success of this movie really relied on Chris Pine.
Right.
And if you don't have Chris Pine, how good is this going to be? And I think what are they just going to find another resurrection tablet or whatever it's called?
But that would be interesting to do it with a whole new cast. I mean, you could do it almost like an anthology, because
I
when
think
people play games and campaigns of D&D,
well, exactly,
you can pick new characters every time.
I think that would be better. You just have to like cast it really well again.
So you use the same creative team, but you switch up the cast.
I think we still have a cameo with
Bradley Cooper.
No, with Regé-Jean.
Interesting.
Page.
She could bring back kind of the side characters.
Yeah.
That's an interesting
idea. Right.
idea.
Like maybe we bring back the Pudgy Dragon. Man, I loved the Pudgy Dragon.
Me too.
It was so fun.
Because I was thinking about, I mean, the only way I could see this working, because I see the same pitfalls I think you're bringing up, I could see it working with self-contained adventures, where maybe I was trying to imagine shuffling the prominence of group members, because some of the smaller characters, their arc is done. You don't really need them anymore.
Yeah.
But you could elevate some of the side characters who there's more meat on the bone. You could bring them back. You'd need some new villains.
Like you can't do Hugh Grant again. He's already, I mean, spoiler, but the bad guy doesn't win. So.
Right, but I would want each of these movies, say there are 3 like there were for Star Trek, I would want them all to be self-contained.
Yeah.
Full. Right. I mean, this was a full, fun adventure.
The plot needs to be simple, so that when you have a sequel that's building on the same heroes and or villains, it has to get more complex, and that I think would be a pitfall for this.
The most important thing is that they wait a few years and keep the script tight.
Yeah.
They can use some of these characters. I think you're right that they could use none of them.
Right.
But yes, that burp really threw me
I'm
off.
really sorry. I thought that was going to be silent and it wasn't. But I'm so sorry.
I really like the opinion that this could be a really satisfying standalone, because it did feel complete in a way that most first genre movies don't. Because when we did the episode on Empire Strikes Back, I think this movie reminded me of some of the things Empire did. And that, of course, was the first sequel after you crack open the big wide world of Star Wars.
Right.
This had a little of that energy because it felt like they explored pretty much every what if you could think of with these characters.
Yeah.
The ideas were really inspired. You have the talking corpses, the fat dragon, the portal gun.
The talking corpses were so funny. I loved that.
Empire Strikes Back felt like the person who loved the franchise most got to play with the toy box and do everything you ever wanted to with the toys. Mm-hmm. This movie felt like that from the jump.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
So I agree that as much as I'd like to see more, I'm very happy with what I saw.
Well, and again, like I said, these characters have all gone through pretty complete arcs.
Yeah.
So like, what else are you going to do? So I really think, and I think that's another thing that Marvel has suffered from is when you have the same character in 8 different movies, they like start to run out of things for them to do and learn from and grow in.
Right. And the same general plot, especially if you're introducing a character and establishing their origin, their defining villain. I think it becomes almost this autopilot. You get that in a lot of fantasy shows. I mean, fantasy is especially susceptible to a lot of these problems. But there is, and I won't name examples, but you know the ones I'm thinking of in your head. There is a lot of generic fantasy sludge. And it doesn't matter what IP it has strapped onto it.
Yeah.
There's a lot of just eyes glazed back. Oh, it's more.
Yeah.
It's just more.
Yeah.
And it doesn't feel like there's any soul to any of it.
Right. But this
one had soul.
It had a distinct personality. Like this universe, this Dungeons and Dragons universe had a personality and flavor and visual language that was different from The Witcher, Lord of the Rings, Wheel of Time. Like it was in like Harry Potter. Like it was different from everything else. And I could recognize it as its own thing.
You've completely sold me on this idea of
totally
making this an anthology.
Yeah.
And having totally new characters.
It's there in the title.
Oh, no, totally. But also, that is the defining thing of this franchise. Whether you're playing the game or the card game or whatever in this universe, it's a fresh adventure or campaign every time.
It's not like Dungeons and Dragons isn't, there's no like, what's the story of Dungeons and Dragons? Right. That's not how it works.
It's a world with set pieces and characters and factions.
And you make your own story.
Imagine if this was a series. Same creative team behind the camera. And you just keep, rolling through the most charismatic actors you can find.
Yeah.
Imagine if you almost treat the relationship to the source material like the Sherlock show did, where you can pull all of the references and set pieces and stuff and totally remix it and reimagine it for a new story. And I don't mean reimagine as in like fix or redo, but I just mean like you pick and choose what you want and you assemble a new narrative and campaign out of that huge extensive lore.
I think that's totally the best way to keep this going, because I think that could work really well. But continuing with these specific characters for no reason other than they were in the first one, like because they're not defining, as far as I understand, none of these characters are like defining characters for the Dungeons and Dragons universe. Like they're just some of the classes you can play as. So I really think they should do this anthology style with maybe 1 or 2 recurring cameos, but no like central characters that come back every time.
And that also puts the creative power of this franchise in the power of the creative people,
right,
and not the on-screen talent. Where it becomes about, as long as the scripts are still good and the direction is still so spirited,
right? Because I think
it'll still be good.
I think that honestly gives it more continuity than having the same actor on screen every time, but it's a different writer, a different director, like, because that makes it messy. But I think having that central creative team stay the same would make it really, really great.
Very cool.
So this movie was really
check this
fun.
Out. Like Dungeons and Dragons: Honor Among Thieves,
and see it in theaters. Like not only to support the movie, but just because it was a fun theater experience.
Our crowd loved this.
We saw it opening night, and so there were a lot of like
D&D people.
There were a lot of D&D
groups
people
of friends. You could tell.
Yeah. It was really, really fun.
Yeah.
So and oddly enough, and like elderly couple sat next to Cam. I don't know. They looked like they didn't know what they were doing there. It was very funny. I hope they had a good time.
Yeah, and I don't want this to be another Operation Fortune where we love it and it's exactly what we're asking for, and then no one goes to see it.
Yeah.
I want this to do better.
For real, yeah. It was really great.
it's not doing the numbers it should, but it's not bombing. It's just kind of one of those sort of down the middle.
But it should be doing better because it's great.
I want it to do better.
Again,
is my point.
I'm not saying this is the best movie I've ever seen, but it was really fun.
Yes.
And there aren't many fun movies anymore.
Especially in fantasy.
Right.
I mean, in the same way MCU sets the tone for superhero movies, so most things are going to emulate that. We're living in the age in the shadow of Game of Thrones.
Yes.
So we get a lot of things trying to be that and not doing it very well. This is very much its own thing.
Yeah, this is not trying to be Game of Thrones at all.
This is like an early 2000s action-adventure movie with a modern fantasy CGI budget.
Yeah, right. And slightly more sensitive politics, but not in an annoying way, you know?
Yes.
So, yeah.
And isn't that part of politics?
Yeah, well, right.
Politics is...
it's like an early 2000s action comedy, but, there's not an obscene amount of cleavage on screen. Do you know what I mean? It's a bit more respectful. And
airbrushing, I guess.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. Yeah, none of the actors had to starve themselves. So yeah, it was, as far as I know. So yeah. Anyway.
All right, cool.
This is a fun movie.
Well, we'll be back with a Witcher discussion on next Friday. And if you want to check out the columns that I can't stop talking about, I guess, those are over on Substack.
They are great. Where
you can support the show, get behind the scenes stuff, and bonus episodes every month, sometimes more than one a month.
Also, for every episode we put out, like this one, there's a Substack post. And so there are extra pictures and other things. Email. And so, yeah.
And everywhere else on social media, we are Second Breakfast Pod. Cool.
All right.
Check this out. It's fun. Chris Pine is just, oh, what a joy. And you know what? Like I complimented Jason Statham for in the Operation Fortune column, he can make fun of himself.
Yes.
It's not like, when you can tell with guys like The Rock and Vin Diesel and all of these huge action stars when they have the most brittle ego. And I don't even mean those two because I don't know anything about them.
Yeah.
But when you have action stars who have it in their contract that they can't lose a fight or they can't be punched because they have to have this perfect image of always being the most powerful guy.
Sure. The
most charismatic and charming thing you can do is be confident and relaxed and self-deprecating.
Yes.
If you do it in a charming way, it's the most endearing thing you can do. And Chris Pine does that for most of this movie.
Yeah. I don't think I've ever seen somebody knit mittens in such a charming way.
Right. But he's goofing on himself. He's having fun with all of that.
Yeah.
It's a lot of fun. I was so impressed with this, and I just wish they hadn't promoted it differently.
Yeah, me too.
All right, cool. We will see you next Friday, and have a good weekend. Check this out with friends. It's really a good time.
It is.
Cool.
All right. Toodaloo.